My mom lied to me about being allergic to the sun so she could isolate and keep me prisoner, then asked for my forgiveness in court. I told her to rot. Now she wants to rebuild our family. I was 4 years old when I first asked my mom why me and my little brother Eli weren't allowed to go outside, and that was the first time that she told me we had severe allergies to sunlight. Eli was only a year younger than me, but I was already seeing him as more of a son than a brother, because as our mom draped thick black fabric over each window and warned us that just one beam of sunlight touching our skin would cause death, all we had was each other. You see, our mother used the supposed sunlight allergy to control everything. What we ate, what we learned, what we knew about the world outside, and we believed it. Every word of it, actually. It was such a strange dynamic, because on the one hand, I hated my mom for not getting an abortion when she had the chance, and on the other hand, I loved her for feeding me. She had convinced me that 90% of kids on the outside starve to death, so I was lucky I even got fed anything. This story, along with the dozens of others about what an amazing hero she was, convinced me that she was an angel, but Eli didn't have that problem. No matter how many times I tried to defend our mom, he continued to completely despise her, and I guess I helped with that. You see, he never really bought into the whole Stockholm Syndrome thing, because most of his love and support came from me, instead of our mother. It was like a sort of drip system. Mom would give us a set amount of food, I'd secretly set aside around a quarter of it, and always give Eli the majority. One time she caught me doing this and wailed on me for not being harsh enough on Eli, and when it came to my rules or punishments, I always listened to her. But when it came to Eli, there was no way I'd watch him suffer as much as I did, so I became skilled at sneaking food under the mattress, hiding it beneath my pillow, or carefully slipping it into his small hands when mom wasn't looking. Eli would whisper a thank you with wide, grateful eyes. Keeping him safe was sort of like a coping mechanism, because the more I focused on him, the less I had to think about myself. Then, one afternoon, our entire world fell apart, because that's when we heard it, a loud banging at the front door. Our mother screamed for us to hide, her voice trembling with genuine fear. My heart hammered in my chest as footsteps rushed through the hallway. Moments later, a woman burst into the room. She was tall, with dark curly hair tied back neatly. Her eyes widened in shock as they adjusted to the darkness, and she immediately ran toward us. I flinched, instinctively bracing myself for punishment or pain, but instead, she enveloped us in a gentle hug. My body froze at the unfamiliar sensation of comfort. Eli clung desperately to her sleeve, his small frame trembling. The woman introduced herself as Miss Jenna from Child Protective Services, promising us we were finally safe. "Please don't murder us!" I yelled as she offered for us to leave. I was ready for her to tell us the lies my mom had prepped us for, how the sun wasn't actually bad, how being outside was a good thing, all stuff my mom warned me that the outside world would tell us. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she just looked at me with a look I'd never seen before. Softness. It was so reassuring that I trusted her to lead. Stepping outside for the first time was surreal. Bright sunlight assaulted my eyes, temporarily blinding me, but gradually the shapes around me came into focus. Trees, buildings, cars, all seemed like things from another planet. Eli held onto Jenna tightly, eyes closed against the bright daylight. He whimpered softly, and I gently stroked his hair, promising him it was okay. In the weeks following our rescue, Eli and I began adjusting to the world. My stomach hurt all the time, and I was sleeping for 20 hours a day, because it was the first time that I hadn't existed in a state of constant starvation. And me and Eli got so used to sleeping on the floor that it was actually hard to sleep on a bed. And throughout all the newfound comfort, an unsettling feeling gnawed at my stomach, something I couldn't quite understand. And up to this point, I had pretty much spent my entire life living by instinct. So instead of simply waiting for the nagging feeling to go away, I chased it. I dug through boxes retrieved from our old apartment, piles of junk mail, bills, old newspapers. None of it seemed important at first. Then I found neatly stacked official documents, carefully hidden inside an envelope labeled medical files. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I scanned each document. My level of reading was so bad that I could barely make out the words. But after 2 hours of investigating, I finally figured it out. Well, kinda. On every disability check addressed to our mother, it was acknowledged that me and my brother's sun allergy was a legitimate illness requiring continued isolation. And at the bottom of every page was Jenna's signature. The letters spanned at least 5 years. A mix of anger and confusion swirled violently in my mind as I stared at Jenna's signature until my eyes burned. 5 years. 5 whole years she knew about us. My hands trembled as I carefully returned the papers to their envelope, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain I'd experienced. The woman who rescued us, who promised safety with gentle hugs and soft words, had been signing off on our imprisonment for years. I sat on the floor surrounded by the evidence, trying to make sense of it. Had she believed the lies about our condition? Had she ever actually seen us during those 5 years? Or had she simply signed the papers without verification, allowing our mother to collect money while keeping us hidden away? The front door opened, startling me from my thoughts. I quickly gathered the papers, stuffing them back into the envelope as I heard Mrs. Klein and Eli coming down the hallway. Eli ran into the room, excited to show me a new toy car doctor Ramirez had given him after his appointment. I forced a smile, hiding the envelope behind my back. That night, sleep evaded me completely. Eli's peaceful breathing from across the room only intensified my turmoil. He trusted Jenna completely, believed she was our savior. How could I shatter that fragile security? I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the envelope hidden beneath my mattress. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jenna's signature, the neat, confident strokes of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I thought about how she always arrived at exactly the scheduled time for her visits, how she asked such specific questions about our care, how she seemed to know details about our lives that we hadn't told her. Eli had nightmares less frequently now, but when they came, they were intense. Tonight, though, he slept soundly, his face relaxed in a way it never had been in our old apartment. In the soft glow of the nightlight Mrs. Klein had installed for us, I could see the changes in him. His cheeks fuller, his skin healthier, his body growing stronger with each passing week. He had formed an attachment to Jenna that worried me now. When she visited, he would run to her, showing her his drawings or the new words he'd learned. She would listen attentively, praising his progress, sometimes bringing small gifts, a matchbox car, a coloring book, once a stuffed bear that he now slept with every night. How could I tell him that the woman he saw as a rescuer had been complicit in our captivity? That while he was starving in the darkness, she was signing forms that allowed it to continue? The truth would devastate him, might even set back the progress he'd made in trusting adults again. But keeping silent felt impossible too. If Jenna had been involved in our imprisonment, what else might she be capable of? What if this placement with Mrs. Klein was just another form of control? What if Jenna was still working with our mother somehow? The questions circled in my mind like hungry wolves, keeping sleep at bay until the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Morning brought no clarity, only a hardened resolve. I waited until our temporary foster mother, Mrs. Klein, took Eli outside to play before confronting Jenna during her scheduled visit. My throat tightened as I placed the envelope on the kitchen table between us. Her smile faltered when I quietly told her I'd found the papers with her signature, spanning 5 years of our captivity. Jenna arrived at exactly 10 a.m., as she always did on Tuesdays. She wore a blue blouse and black pants, her curly hair pulled back in its usual neat ponytail. She greeted Mrs. Klein warmly, asking about her arthritis and commenting on the flowers blooming in the front yard. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Klein leading Eli to the small playground in the backyard. He was still cautious in direct sunlight, preferring the shaded areas under the trees, but he was getting braver each day. Mrs. Klein had been teaching him the names of birds that visited the bird feeder she'd installed, and he was eager to see if any new ones had arrived overnight. When they were out of sight, I took the envelope from where I'd hidden it in the drawer of the side table. My hands were steady now, the night of uncertainty replaced by a cold determination to know the truth. Jenna was arranging some papers on the kitchen table, forms about our progress that Mrs. Klein would need to sign. She looked up with her usual warm smile when I approached, but something in my expression made the smile fade slightly. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice concerned. I placed the envelope on the table between us, my finger tapping the label, medical files, written in my mother's handwriting. "I found these," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "They have your name on them, your signature." The transformation in her face was instant, the mask of compassion slipping to reveal something calculating and cold. She quickly glanced around to ensure we were alone before leaning forward with a rehearsed explanation about working within a broken system, about limited resources forcing difficult compromises. For just a moment, her eyes widened with genuine surprise, then narrowed as she assessed the situation. The warm concern vanished from her expression, replaced by something harder, more calculating. She glanced toward the window, confirming that Mrs. Klein and Eli were still outside, then turned back to me. "You've been going through confidential files," she said, her voice lower now, with an edge I'd never heard before. "Those aren't for children to read. They're about me and Eli," I countered, finding courage in my anger. "They say we have allergies to sunlight. They're all lies." She sighed, reaching for the envelope, but I pulled it back toward me. Something flickered across her face, annoyance, maybe even anger, before she composed herself again. "The system is complicated," she began, her tone shifting to something that sounded rehearsed. "There are thousands of children who need help, and not enough resources to help them all. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions about which cases to prioritize." "You knew about us for 5 years," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You signed all these papers." She leaned forward, lowering her voice further. "Your mother was very convincing. She had medical documentation, doctor's notes, fake ones," I interrupted. "We never saw any doctors." "I didn't know that at the time," she said smoothly. "And when concerns were raised, I investigated. That's why you're here now, isn't it? Because I found you and got you out." But something in her explanation rang false. The dates on the papers, the regularity of her signatures year after year, the detailed descriptions of home visits that never happened, it all pointed to something more deliberate than being fooled by convincing forgeries. My stomach nodded as she smoothly transitioned from excuses to subtle threats about how placement decisions could separate me from Eli if I caused problems. The casual cruelty of it stunned me, how easily she weaponized my love for my brother. "These things you're saying are very serious accusations," she continued, her voice taking on a concerned tone that no longer seemed genuine to me. "They could cause a lot of problems for me, yes, but also for you and Eli." She reached across the table, not for the envelope this time, but to touch my arm in what appeared to be a comforting gesture. I fought the urge to pull away. "You and Eli have made such wonderful progress here with Mrs. Klein," she said, "but foster placements are always temporary, you know. The next steps depend on many factors." The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. "Cause trouble, and those next steps might not keep you and Eli together. There's a shortage of foster homes willing to take siblings," she continued, her voice gentle but her eyes hard, "especially siblings with special needs and adjustment issues. If your current placement doesn't work out, I can't guarantee you'd be placed together." The threat hit its mark. The thought of being separated from Eli was more terrifying than anything else I could imagine. He depended on me, needed me, had always needed me. Without me to protect him, to comfort him during nightmares, to help him navigate this new world, what would happen to him? "I'm just trying to help you understand how things work," Jenna said, her voice softening as she saw the fear in my face. "The system isn't perfect. Sometimes we have to work within its limitations to get the best outcomes for children like you and Eli." When she reached for the envelope, I snatched it back, a small act of defiance that made her eyes narrow dangerously. That afternoon, I overheard Jenna telling Mrs. Klein about a family called the Marshalls, who lived in a remote countryside location, perfect for children with special medical needs like ours. The isolation in her description sent ice through my veins. This wasn't over. She was trying to hide us away again. I had retreated to the hallway outside the kitchen, the envelope clutched to my chest, my heart racing with fear and anger. Through the partially open door, I could hear Jenna and Mrs. Klein talking. Eli was still outside, now sitting on the porch steps examining a caterpillar he'd found on a leaf. "They're a lovely couple," Jenna was saying, her voice warm and enthusiastic. "They fostered several children with medical issues before. Their home is on 5 acres, very private, with plenty of space for the boys to play safely." "But I thought Dr. Ramirez said they don't actually have any medical issues," Mrs. Klein replied, sounding confused. "Just malnutrition and developmental delays from their isolation." "Well, yes," Jenna said smoothly, "but they still have special needs. The transition to normal life is going to take time. The Marshalls' home is perfect, quiet, away from the overstimulation of the city, with a consistent routine, and they're willing to take both boys, which is always our preference." "I suppose," Mrs. Klein said, though she sounded uncertain, "but they've been doing so well here. Eli especially has really come out of his shell in the past few weeks." "The Marshalls have much more experience with traumatized children," Jenna countered, "and their home is already set up for children who need gradual exposure to sunlight. They have special window coverings, a covered play area outdoors." My blood ran cold. Special window coverings, a covered play area. It sounded too familiar, too much like another version of the prison we'd just escaped. "How far away is this place?" Mrs. Klein asked. "About 2 hours north," Jenna replied. "Very peaceful area, limited internet and cell service, but that can be a blessing with kids who need fewer distractions. Limited internet, limited cell service, limited contact with the outside world. The parallels to our previous captivity were too obvious to ignore. I'd like to meet them before making any decisions," Mrs. Klein said. "The boys have been through so much change already." "Of course," Jenna agreed. "I've tentatively scheduled a visit for this weekend, if that works for you. The Marshalls are eager to meet the boys. This weekend, just days away." The timeline sent panic surging through me. Whatever Jenna was planning, it was happening quickly. That night, I carefully examined the remaining documents, discovering a pattern of families Jenna worked with, all living in remote locations, all with concerning gaps in visitation records. My reading skills were poor, but determination pushed me through each page, piecing together a disturbing picture of neglect spanning years. After Mrs. Klein and Eli had gone to bed, I spread the papers across the floor of our bedroom, using a flashlight to examine each one more carefully. My reading was slow and laborious, but fear drove me to push through the difficult words and confusing language. The documents included not just the disability forms and medical reports about us, but also references to other cases Jenna had handled. Names were often redacted or abbreviated, but patterns emerged. There were mentions of the Marshalls dating back several years, along with other families with similar descriptions: remote locations, experience with special needs children, limited outside contact. What struck me most were the gaps in the record. Home visits that should have happened monthly were sometimes spaced 6 months apart. Medical evaluations that should have been annual were missing for years at a time. And children who appeared in the record suddenly disappeared, with no explanation of where they had gone or why their cases had been closed. One name appeared repeatedly in connection with the Marshalls, a child referred to only as J.M. The case notes mentioned ongoing treatment for photosensitivity and continued isolation protocol, language eerily similar to what had been written about Eli and me. But the notes about J.M. stopped abruptly 2 years earlier, with no indication of of what had happened to the child. I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The documents painted a picture of a system that had failed not just us, but potentially many other children. And at the center of that failure was Jenna, whose signature appeared on form after form, authorizing placements, approving continued isolation, signing off on questionable medical treatments. By the time I carefully returned the papers to their envelope and hid it under my mattress, it was past midnight. My eyes burned from straining to read in the dim light, and my head ached with the effort of piecing together fragments of information. But one thing was clear: Jenna was not who she pretended to be, and the Marshalls were not a safe placement for us. 3 days later, a chance discovery changed everything when Mrs. Klein accidentally left her computer unlocked. A quick search revealed news articles about a child's death at a foster home, the Marshalls' home, 2 years earlier, ruled accidental but with troubling inconsistencies. The investigation had been quickly closed. The caseworker listed as Jay Campbell. Jenna. Mrs. Klein had been baking cookies with Eli in the kitchen, teaching him how to measure flour and crack eggs. I had excused myself, saying I needed to use the bathroom, but instead slipped into her small home office where her laptop sat open on the desk, the screen showing her email inbox. I had never used a computer before, another consequence of our isolation, but I'd watched Mrs. Klein enough times to understand the basics. I clicked on the search icon and carefully typed Marshall's foster family, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The results loaded slowly, and at first showed nothing alarming. A few social media profiles, some community event listings. But on the second page of results, a headline caught my eye: Foster child's death ruled accidental after investigation. My hands shook as I clicked on the link, opening a news article from a local paper dated 2 years earlier. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs describing how a 7-year-old foster child had died after wandering away from the Marshalls' rural property and falling into a pond. The child, identified only by the initials JM to protect their privacy, had been found too late for resuscitation efforts to succeed. The article mentioned that an investigation had been conducted and concluded that the death was a tragic accident, with no negligence on the part of the foster parents. The case had been closed within weeks. JM, the same initials that had appeared in the documents I'd found, the child whose records stopped abruptly 2 years ago. I scrolled down, finding a related article that provided more details. JM had been placed with the Marshalls due to special medical needs requiring a controlled environment. The child had been with them for nearly 3 years before the drowning, and the caseworker who had placed JM with the Marshalls and who had also led the subsequent investigation was listed as Jenna Campbell. The article included quotes from Jenna, describing the Marshalls as exemplary foster parents who had provided exceptional care for a child with complex needs. She expressed her complete confidence that the drowning had been nothing more than a tragic accident, noting that children with JM's condition often exhibited unpredictable behavior. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. JM had been like us, a child isolated under the guise of medical necessity, placed in a remote location with limited oversight. And when JM had died under suspicious circumstances, Jenna had ensured the investigation was quickly closed. Now she wanted to place us with the same family. I needed proof that would make adults listen, something irrefutable. The opportunity came when Jenna left her bag unattended during her next visit. Heart pounding, I quickly photographed pages from her planner with Mrs. Klein's old digital camera, lists of families, payment amounts, and dates that corresponded perfectly with the disability checks. Jenna's next visit was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, just 2 days before our planned visit to the Marshalls. She arrived carrying her usual leather bag and a folder of papers, which she set on the kitchen table while she greeted Mrs. Klein. "The boys are in the backyard," Mrs. Klein told her. "I'll go get them for you." As soon as Mrs. Klein stepped outside, I moved quickly. Jenna had gone to use the bathroom, leaving her bag on a chair in the living room. I had maybe 2 minutes at most. Mrs. Klein's digital camera was on the shelf where she always kept it. She had been teaching us to use it, letting us take pictures of birds in the yard or flowers in her garden. My hands trembled as I grabbed it and hurried to Jenna's bag. Inside was her planner, a thick book with a black leather cover. I opened it to the current month, finding notes about various cases, including ours. But it was when I flipped back through previous months that I found what I was looking for. Page after page contained lists of names, families like the Marshalls, with notes about their locations and the children placed with them. Beside each entry were numbers, dollar amounts ranging from 500 to several thousand, and dates that aligned perfectly with the disability checks I'd found in our mother's files. I photographed as many pages as I could, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Jenna would hear it when she returned. The camera made a soft clicking sound with each picture, and I winced, glancing nervously toward the hallway. Just as I heard the bathroom door open, I snapped one final photo, closed the planner, and shoved it back into her bag. I had barely hidden the camera behind a couch cushion when Jenna walked back into the living room. When Jenna discovered me near her bag, her smile tightened as she casually mentioned how excited the Marshalls were to meet us that weekend. Time was running out. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "No," I said quickly. "I was just waiting for Mrs. Klein to come back with Eli." She studied me for a moment, then smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, while we're alone, I wanted to tell you some good news. The Marshalls are so excited to meet you and Eli this weekend. They've already prepared rooms for you both." The way she emphasized both made it clear she remembered our previous conversation, her implied threat about separating us if I caused problems. "They have a beautiful property," she continued, sitting down on the couch beside me, too close for comfort. "Very private, very peaceful. No nosy neighbors asking questions or strangers coming by unannounced." The threat was thinly veiled. No witnesses. No one to help if things went wrong. "Mrs. Klein says we're doing well here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Klein is a temporary placement," Jenna replied smoothly. "The Marshalls are interested in a more permanent arrangement. Wouldn't you like that? A forever home for you and Eli?" The words forever home sent a chill through me. I thought of JM, whose forever home had become a forever grave. "I like it here," I insisted. "Eli does too." Jenna's smile tightened further. "Children don't always know what's best for them. That's why they have adults to make decisions for them." She patted my knee, her touch making my skin crawl. "Trust me, this is going to be wonderful for both of you." Before I could respond, Mrs. Klein returned with Eli, who ran to show Jenna a caterpillar he'd found. The moment passed, but Jenna's message had been delivered clearly. Our fate was decided, and she expected no resistance. With trembling hands, I called Dr. Ramirez, the kind physician who had examined us after our rescue. Her concerned voice was like a lifeline as I frantically explained what I'd discovered, begging her to believe me. The silence that followed nearly broke me before she calmly asked me to bring everything I'd found to the hospital tomorrow. She would help. I waited until after dinner, when Mrs. Klein was helping Eli with his bath. The phone was in the kitchen, and I had memorized Dr. Ramirez's number from the card she had given Mrs. Klein for emergencies. My fingers shook as I dialed, and I nearly hung up when a receptionist answered, but I managed managed to ask for Dr. Ramirez, explaining that it was urgent, that I was one of her patients. After what seemed like an eternity on hold, her voice came through the line. Warm, professional, familiar. This is Dr. Ramirez. Is this Mrs. Klein? No, I whispered, glancing nervously toward the hallway to make sure I was still alone. It's me, from the hospital, the boy with the sun allergy that wasn't real. Oh, her voice softened with recognition. Yes, of course. Is everything all right? Are you feeling sick? The concern in her voice nearly undid me. It had been so long since an adult had shown genuine worry for my well-being without an ulterior motive. I found something, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Papers about Jenna. She knew about us for years. She signed forms, she got money, and now she wants to send us to a family where a kid died. And I think she's covering it up, and no one will believe me because I'm just a kid and— Slow down, Dr. Ramirez interrupted gently. Take a deep breath for me. I obeyed, drawing in a shaky breath. That's good, she said. Now, you're telling me you found documents showing that Jenna Campbell knew about your situation before your rescue? Yes, I confirmed. For 5 years. She signed all the papers, and now she's trying to send us to live with a family called the Marshalls, and a kid died there 2 years ago, and Jenna covered it up. And the Marshalls, Dr. Ramirez repeated, her voice sharpening. Are you certain that's the name? Yes, I said. We're supposed to visit them this weekend. There was a brief silence, then Dr. Ramirez spoke again, her voice calm, but with an underlying urgency. Listen to me carefully. I need you to bring everything you found to the hospital tomorrow. Can you do that? I think so, I said. Mrs. Klein takes us to the park near the hospital on Fridays. Good, she said. Come to the pediatric clinic on the 3rd floor. Ask for me at the desk. I'll make sure they're expecting you. You believe me? I asked, my voice small. Yes, she said firmly. I believe you, and I'm going to help. The next morning, I feigned illness to avoid a scheduled outing, then slipped out while Mrs. Klein was distracted. The bus ride to the hospital stretched my nerves to breaking point. The envelope clutched against my chest containing our only hope. Mrs. Klein had been concerned when I complained of a stomach ache at breakfast, feeling my forehead for fever and offering to stay home with me while a neighbor took Eli to his scheduled play date. No, I insisted. I'll be okay here. I just want to rest. She hesitated, clearly torn. I don't like leaving you alone when you're not feeling well. It's just for an hour, I said. I'll probably sleep anyway. Finally, she agreed, leaving me with strict instructions to stay in bed and call her immediately if I felt worse. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway, then sprang into action. I gathered everything: the envelope of documents, the camera with the photos of Jenna's planner, the newspaper articles I'd printed from Mrs. Klein's computer. I stuffed it all into a small backpack Mrs. Klein had bought me, along with the $20 bill I'd found in the couch cushions weeks ago and had been saving for an emergency. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. I'd never been there alone, but I'd memorized the route during our trips to the park. My heart hammered in my chest as I walked quickly down the sidewalk, constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Jenna's car following me. The bus driver gave me a curious look when I boarded alone, but accepted my money without question. I sat near the front, clutching my backpack to my chest, watching the streets pass by through the window. The hospital was 7 stops away, according to the route map posted above the driver. Each time the bus stopped to let passengers on or off, I tensed, afraid Jenna would somehow appear. By the time we reached the hospital, my shirt was damp with nervous sweat, and my hands were cramping from gripping the backpack so tightly. The hospital was huge and confusing, with multiple entrances and a maze of corridors. I followed the signs to the main lobby, then to the elevators, remembering Dr. Ramirez's instructions to go to the pediatric clinic on the 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened on the 3rd floor, I stepped out into a brightly colored hallway decorated with cartoon characters and animal murals. The pediatric clinic was at the end of the hall, its entrance marked by a large rainbow arch. At the reception desk, a woman in colorful scrubs looked up with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw I was alone. I need to see Dr. Ramirez, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She's expecting me. Dr. Ramirez's face grew increasingly grave as she examined each document, her professional composure cracking when she reached the photographs of Jenna's planner. She immediately called someone she referred to as a trusted colleague in child services, speaking in urgent, hushed tones about emergency placement reviews and investigation protocols. Dr. Ramirez led me to a small consultation room away from the busy clinic area. She closed the door behind us, offering me a juice box and crackers from a cabinet before sitting down across from me at a small table. May I see what you've brought? She asked gently. I opened my backpack and carefully laid out everything. The envelope of documents first, then the camera, and finally the printed articles about J.M.'s death. She started with the documents, reading each one carefully, her expression growing more troubled with each page. When she came to the disability checks with Jenna's signature, she paused, examining them closely before setting them aside in a separate pile. These are very serious, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Next, she looked at the camera, scrolling through the photos I'd taken of Jenna's planner. Her hand stilled when she reached a particular page, and she went back to the documents, comparing dates and names. They match, she said quietly. The payment dates in her planner align perfectly with the disability checks. Finally, she read the articles about J.M.'s death, her professional composure visibly cracking as she connected the dots between that case and ours. Excuse me for a moment, she said, standing up. I need to make a phone call. Please stay right here, okay? You're safe. She stepped outside, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could hear her voice, urgent but controlled, speaking to someone she called her trusted colleague in CPS oversight. Words like emergency review, placement freeze, and immediate investigation drifted through the gap. When she returned, her face was set with determination. I've spoken with someone who can help, she explained, sitting back down across from me. She works in the department that oversees Child Protective Services. This isn't the first concern that's been raised about Jenna Campbell, but it's the first time anyone has brought forward this kind of evidence. What's going to happen? I asked, my voice small. First, we're going to make sure you and Eli don't go anywhere near the Marshalls, she said firmly. My colleague is arranging for an emergency review of your case, which will put any placement changes on hold. Then there will be an investigation, a proper one this time, into Jenna's conduct and the Marshalls foster home. Will anyone believe me? I asked. I'm just a kid. Dr. Ramirez reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. These documents speak for themselves, she said. And I believe you. So does my colleague. That's enough to start with. Hours later, our world shifted again when police officers arrived at Mrs. Klein's house. Jenna's face drained of color when she saw them, her eyes darting to me with such hatred that I instinctively moved closer to Eli. The officer spoke to her privately while Dr. Ramirez gently explained to me that we would be temporarily moved to a different foster home while they investigated. Mrs. Klein had been frantic when she returned home to find me missing. By the time I was brought back by a social worker from Dr. Ramirez's office, she was in tears, alternating between relief at my safety and anger at my disappearance. I was so worried, she kept saying, hugging me tightly. You can't just leave like that. Anything could have happened to you. The social worker, a woman named Ms. Patel, explained the situation to Mrs. Klein in quiet tones while I sat with Eli on the living room floor, helping him build a tower with his blocks. He sensed something was wrong but didn't ask questions, just leaned against my side for reassurance. It was nearly dinner time when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Klein answered it, and I heard multiple voices in the entryway, deep, authoritative ones that made my heart race with anxiety. Jenna walked into the living room first, her usual smile in place, though it looked strained around the edges. There's been a misunderstanding, she announced brightly. Nothing to worry about, just some paperwork issues that need clearing up. Behind her came 2 police officers in uniform and Dr. Ramirez, whose presence made me exhale with relief. Jenna's smile faltered when she saw me, her eyes narrowing slightly before she composed herself again. "Why don't we talk in the kitchen?" one of the officers suggested, gesturing for Jenna to accompany them. As they moved away, Dr. Ramirez came to sit beside me and Eli on the floor. "You did a very brave thing today," she said quietly. "The officers need to ask Jenna some questions about the documents you found." From the kitchen came the sound of raised voices. Jenna's high and defensive, the officers calm but insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone told me enough. "What's happening?" Eli asked, his small face creased with worry. "Some grown-ups didn't do their jobs properly," Dr. Ramirez explained simply. "The police are making sure they start doing them right." The kitchen door opened, and Jenna emerged, flanked by the officers. Her professional facade was still in place, but her eyes burned with fury when they met mine. The look sent a chill through me. It was pure hatred, a promise of retribution if she ever got the chance. "Ms. Campbell will be coming with us to answer some questions," one officer explained to Mrs. Klein. "In the meantime, Ms. Patel will be your new contact person for the boys." Jenna maintained her professional facade as she was escorted out, but the venomous glance she shot me promised this wasn't over. The investigation moved slowly, agonizingly so. Our new foster parents, the Taylors, were kind but cautious, clearly informed about our situation without knowing all details. Mr. Taylor taught math at the local middle school, while Mrs. Taylor ran a small bakery, their home filled with the normalcy we'd never known. Regular meals, consistent bedtimes, gentle corrections instead of punishment. The decision to move us from Mrs. Klein's house came the next day. Ms. Patel explained that it was for our protection. If Jenna was released pending investigation, she knew where Mrs. Klein lived and might try to contact us. "It's just temporary," Ms. Patel assured us as we packed our few belongings, "until things are sorted out." Mrs. Klein cried when we left, hugging us both tightly and making us promise to call her once we were settled. I felt guilty for causing her pain, but the memory of Jenna's hateful glare convinced me it was necessary. The Taylors lived in a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood across town. Mr. Taylor was tall and thin with glasses and a neat beard, while Mrs. Taylor was shorter with warm brown skin and a cloud of curly black hair that she often tied back with colorful scarves. They greeted us with cautious smiles, showing us to a bedroom we would share, already prepared with twin beds and a bookshelf stocked with children's books. "We know this is all very sudden," Mrs. Taylor said gently, "so we'll take things slow, okay? No pressure to talk about anything until you're ready." Their home smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, Mrs. Taylor's bakery specialties, and was filled with books, plants, and framed photographs of smiling children of various ages. "Former foster kids," Mr. Taylor explained when he caught me examining the photos. "We've been doing this for about 12 years now. Unlike our previous placements, the Taylors had a routine that never varied. Breakfast was at 7:30, dinner at 6, bedtime was 8:30, preceded by reading time. Mr. Taylor left for school each weekday at 7:45, and Mrs. Taylor worked in her bakery from 5 a.m. until noon, leaving her afternoons free to be with us. The consistency was comforting in ways I hadn't expected. Knowing exactly when meals would happen, when bedtime was, what each day would bring, it created a sense of security that was entirely new. 2 months passed before we learned that Jenna had been suspended pending investigation, with multiple cases being reviewed. The relief was temporary. Suspended wasn't fired, wasn't arrested, wasn't enough to ensure our safety. The nightmares persisted, visions of Jenna finding us, taking us to some remote location where no one would hear us scream. Ms. Patel visited weekly, updating us on the investigation in simple terms appropriate for our ages. Jenna had been placed on administrative leave while her cases were reviewed. The Marshal's foster license had been temporarily suspended pending investigation. Other families Jenna had worked with were being interviewed. "It's a slow process," Ms. Patel explained during one visit, her voice apologetic. "There are a lot of records to go through, a lot of people to talk to. The slowness of bureaucracy was maddening. Each night I checked the locks on our bedroom window before going to bed, terrified that Jenna would somehow find us. In my nightmares, she would appear at the foot of my bed, her face twisted with rage, reaching for me with hands that transformed into claws. I would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, and often find that Eli had crawled into my bed during the night, seeking comfort from his own bad dreams. Mrs. Taylor would sometimes find us like that in the morning, curled together like kittens, and her eyes would fill with a sadness that I couldn't quite understand. During the day, I jumped at unexpected sounds, a car door slamming, a knock at the door, the ring of the telephone. Each time the doorbell rang, my heart would race with panic until I saw it was just the mail carrier or a neighbor. Mr. Taylor noticed my hypervigilance and began teaching me chess as a way to channel my anxious energy. The complex game required total concentration, forcing my mind away from fears about Jenna and what might happen next. We would sit at the kitchen table for hours, the wooden pieces moving across the board as he patiently explained strategies and rules. Mrs. Taylor focused on Eli, teaching him to bake simple things like cookies and muffins. He loved the precise measurements, the transformation of ingredients into something delicious. The pride on his face when he presented his creations at dinner was a glimpse of the normal child he might have been without our years of captivity. Then came the morning Mrs. Taylor gently informed me that our mother had requested visitation rights from jail. The thought of facing her sent panic coursing through me, but beneath it stirred a desperate need for answers only she could provide. It was a Saturday morning. Eli was still asleep upstairs while I helped Mrs. Taylor make pancakes, carefully measuring flour into a bowl as she had taught me. Mr. Taylor sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper and occasionally commenting on stories he thought might interest me. The phone rang, and Mrs. Taylor answered it, her expression growing serious as she listened to the caller. She glanced at me several times during the conversation, finally saying, "Yes, I'll discuss it with them and let you know." After hanging up, she exchanged a look with Mr. Taylor, who folded his newspaper and nodded slightly. "That was Ms. Patel," Mrs. Taylor said, sitting down at the table and gesturing for me to join them. "Your mother has requested to see you." The wooden spoon I was holding clattered to the counter. "See us? Why?" "She's entitled to request visitation," Mr. Taylor explained gently. "It doesn't mean it will happen if you don't want it to. You have a say in this." "What about Eli?" I asked, my protective instincts flaring. "The request was just for you," Mrs. Taylor said, "not Eli." That detail struck me as significant. My mother knew that Eli had never bonded with her, had always resisted her control in ways I hadn't. She was targeting me specifically, perhaps hoping to manipulate me as she had for years. "You don't have to decide right now," Mrs. Taylor assured me. "Take some time to think about it." But even as fear twisted in my stomach at the thought of seeing my mother again, curiosity stirred alongside it. Why had she done what she did? How had her arrangement with Jenna begun? What was real and what was lie in the world she had created for us? The questions haunted me for days. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, weighing fear against the need for answers. Eli sensed my turmoil, staying closer to me than usual, as if afraid I might disappear. Finally, after a week of deliberation, I told the Taylors I wanted to see my mother. Just once. Alone. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Taylor asked, concern evident in her voice. "I need to know why," I said simply. "I need to hear it from her." The prison visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. My mother appeared smaller somehow, her eyes lighting with desperate hope when she saw me. The rehearsed speech I'd planned evaporated as she reached for my hands across the table, her familiar touch sending conflicting waves of comfort and revulsion through me. The prison was a 2-hour drive from the Taylor's house. Mr. Taylor took the day off work to drive me there, explaining the process as we traveled, the security checks we would go through, the rules of the visiting room, what to expect from the environment. environment. I'll be right outside the whole time, he promised. If you want to leave at any point, just tell the guard, and they'll bring you out immediately. The prison itself was a sprawling complex of gray buildings surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. The sight of it made my stomach clench with anxiety. Inside, we went through metal detectors and pat-downs before being escorted to the visiting area. A large room filled with small tables and plastic chairs, guards stationed along the walls. Mr. Taylor squeezed my shoulder reassuringly before taking a seat in the waiting area. I'll be right here, he reminded me. I was led to a table in the middle of the room. Minutes later, a door on the opposite side opened, and my mother appeared, escorted by a female guard. She wore a baggy orange jumpsuit that hung from her frame, revealing how much weight she had lost. Her hair, once long and often unwashed, had been cut short, emphasizing the gauntness of her face. When she saw me, her eyes lit with a desperate hope that made my chest tighten. The guard directed her to the chair across from me, then stepped back to a respectful distance. You came, my mother said, her voice hoarse with emotion. I wasn't sure you would. The rehearsed questions I had planned to ask evaporated from my mind. Instead, I sat in silence, studying the woman who had shaped my entire existence through lies and manipulation. She reached across the table for my hands. I flinched but didn't pull away, allowing her familiar touch. The same hands that had both hurt and comforted me throughout my childhood. The contact sent conflicting waves through me, revulsion at the memories of abuse, but also a treacherous comfort in the familiarity. When I quietly asked why she paid Jenna to keep us imprisoned, her face crumpled. Between broken sobs, she revealed a twisted narrative of protection and paranoia. How after my father's death, she became convinced the world would take us from her. How Jenna had initially investigated a neighbor's concern but offered an arrangement instead. Why? I finally managed to ask, the single word containing all my confusion, anger, and hurt. She wiped at her tears with the sleeve of her jumpsuit. I was trying to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. After your father died, I couldn't cope. I was afraid all the time. Afraid of losing you both. Afraid of failing you. Afraid of the world and what it might do to you. I remembered my father only vaguely. A tall man with a laugh that seemed to fill our old apartment. Gone when I was barely 3 years old. His death in a car accident had changed everything, though I hadn't understood how profoundly until now. When you were little, you got a bad sunburn at the park, my mother continued. You were so red and in so much pain. You cried for days. I felt like the worst mother in the world for letting that happen to you. I had no memory of this incident, but I could see how it had twisted in her mind, becoming the seed of the elaborate lie about our condition. Then the neighbor called CPS, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She'd seen me yelling at you, I think. Or maybe she noticed I wasn't taking you outside anymore. I don't remember. But Jenna came to investigate. She described how terrified she'd been, certain that Jenna would take us away. But instead of following protocol, Jenna had noticed my mother's disability checks, legitimate ones she received for her own diagnosed mental health issues, and proposed an alternative. She said she could make it go away, my mother explained. Said she could help me get additional benefits if we documented that you and Eli had special needs. Said lots of parents did it. Got extra money for their kids' conditions. $500 monthly to falsify reports. To maintain our isolation under the guise of medical necessity. The confession poured from her like poison being drained. Years of deception laid bare in the sterile visiting room. When I asked if she ever truly believed we had sun allergies, her hesitation told me everything. The lie had become her reality, a delusion she clung to rather than face her own monstrosity. At first I knew it wasn't true, she admitted, unable to meet my eyes. But it was easier to believe it than to admit what I was really doing. And after a while, I don't know, the lie became real to me. I started seeing dangers everywhere, threats in every beam of sunlight, every stranger who looked at you too long. Her mental health had deteriorated over the years, the initial deception evolving into a genuine delusion that she fiercely protected. The payments to Jenna ensured that no one questioned our absence from school, from doctor's appointments, from normal life. Did you ever care that we were hungry? I asked, my voice hardening as I remembered the constant gnawing pain in my stomach, the dizziness from lack of food. She flinched as if I'd struck her. The money, it wasn't enough. After paying Jenna, there wasn't much left, and I couldn't work much because I had to stay home with you both. It wasn't an answer, just another excuse. I could see now that she had prioritized maintaining her delusion over our basic needs, convincing herself that starvation was preferable to the imagined dangers of the outside world. Were there others? I asked. Other kids like us? She nodded slowly. Jenna mentioned other families sometimes. Special arrangements, she called them. Children with unusual needs that the system couldn't handle properly. I thought of JM, the child who had died at the Marshall's home. How many others had there been? How many children hidden away under false pretenses, their isolation justified by fabricated medical conditions? I'm sorry, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. I know it doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't make it better, but I am sorry. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the monster of my nightmares, nor the protecting angel she had pretended to be, but a broken woman whose illness had destroyed not only her life, but nearly ours as well. I left feeling hollow, her pleas for forgiveness echoing behind me. The evidence from my mother's confession, combined with financial records subpoenaed from Jenna's accounts, finally broke the case open. Jenna was arrested 3 weeks later, charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, fraud, and criminal negligence. The investigation expanded to include all her cases, revealing a pattern of similar arrangements with other vulnerable families. The Marshall's foster license was revoked, their current foster children removed for evaluation. Mr. Taylor was waiting exactly where he had promised, rising immediately when he saw me emerge from the visiting room. He didn't ask questions, just placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as we walked out of the prison. In the car, I finally spoke, recounting my mother's confession in a flat, emotionless voice. Mr. Taylor listened without interrupting, his hands steady on the steering wheel, occasionally nodding to show he was following. You did a brave thing today, he said when I finished. Facing her, asking those questions, that took real courage. I didn't feel brave. I felt empty, drained of emotion, as if my mother's confession had scooped out something vital from inside me. When we returned home, Mrs. Taylor and Eli were waiting with fresh cookies and hot chocolate. Eli hugged me tightly, as if sensing I needed comfort without understanding why. That night, he crawled into my bed without a word, his small presence anchoring me when I felt I might float away on a sea of confusion and grief. The next morning, Ms. Patel arrived with news. My mother's confession had been recorded as part of the prison visitation protocol. Combined with the documents I had found and the photographs of Jenna's planner, it provided compelling evidence for the investigation. 3 weeks later, Jenna was arrested at her home. The charges were extensive: child endangerment, fraud, criminal negligence, obstruction of justice, and more. The investigation had expanded to include all her cases over the past decade, revealing at least 7 other families with arrangements similar to my mother's. The Marshalls were among those investigated. Their foster license was immediately revoked, and the 2 children currently in their care were removed for medical evaluation and placement in emergency foster homes. The investigation into J.M.'s death was reopened, with forensic experts re-examining evidence that had been overlooked or dismissed in the original investigation. 6 months after our rescue, we sat in a courtroom watching Jenna's sentencing. She never looked at us, never acknowledged the lives she damaged through her calculated corruption. The judge's words about betrayal of trust and exploitation of vulnerable children seemed inadequate against the magnitude of her crimes, but the 12-year sentence offered some measure of justice. Our mother received 8 years, her cooperation and obvious mental illness considered mitigating factors. The courtroom was intimidating: high ceilings, wooden benches, the judge elevated on a platform at the front. The Taylors sat on either side of us, providing a buffer of safety in the unfamiliar environment. environment. Jenna sat at a table with her lawyer, her back straight, her hair pulled back in its usual neat ponytail. She wore a conservative gray suit instead of her usual colorful blouses, perhaps hoping to appear more serious and professional to the judge. Throughout the proceedings, she never turned around, never acknowledged our presence in the room. It was as if we didn't exist for her, just as we hadn't existed as real children with real needs during all those years she had signed off on our imprisonment. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically: the falsified medical reports, the disability checks, the photographs from Jenna's planner showing payments received, testimony from other families involved in similar arrangements. The pattern revealed was damning. Jenna had systematically exploited vulnerable parents and children for financial gain, using her position of authority to silence questions and prevent oversight. When the judge delivered the sentence, 12 years in prison followed by 5 years of supervised release, plus restitution to the victims, Jenna finally showed emotion. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and her hand trembled as she reached for a glass of water on the table. Our mother's sentencing came a week later. She pleaded guilty to child abuse and neglect, cooperation with her own prosecution, and her diagnosed mental illness considered mitigating factors. The 8-year sentence she received seemed both too much and too little. Too much for a woman whose illness had warped her perception of reality, too little for the years of suffering she had inflicted on us. As we left the courthouse, Eli slipped his hand into mine, a gesture unchanged since our days in darkness, but now framed by sunlight that no longer frightened us. The Taylors waited patiently by their car, having promised to take us for ice cream regardless of the verdict. 2 weeks later, they nervously asked if we would consider letting them adopt us permanently. The ice cream shop was bright and cheerful, with colorful murals on the walls and a dizzying array of flavors to choose from. Eli, still overwhelmed by too many options, asked me to choose for him as he always did. I selected chocolate for him and strawberry for myself, flavors we had come to love during our months of freedom. As we sat at a small table by the window, Mr. Taylor cleared his throat nervously. "We've been thinking," he began, exchanging a glance with his wife. Mrs. Taylor reached across the table, her hand covering both of ours. "We've grown to love you both very much," she said softly, "and we were wondering how you would feel about making our arrangement more permanent." "Permanent?" Eli asked, chocolate ice cream smeared around his mouth. "We'd like to adopt you," Mr. Taylor explained. "If that's something you would want, it would mean you'd stay with us forever, as our sons." The question hung in the air, momentous in its normalcy, the offer of belonging, of permanence, of family without conditions or darkness. Eli's immediate enthusiastic acceptance made Mrs. Taylor laugh through tears, while Mr. Taylor squeezed my shoulder gently, understanding my need for more time to process such a monumental shift. Eli's face lit up with joy, ice cream forgotten as he launched himself into Mrs. Taylor's arms. "Forever?" he asked, seeking confirmation of this miraculous possibility. "Forever," she promised, hugging him tightly as tears spilled down her cheeks. Mr. Taylor looked at me, his expression gentle and understanding. "You don't have to answer right away," he said. "It's a big decision. Take all the time you need to think about it." I nodded, grateful for his patience. The concept of forever had different implications for me than for Eli. I had been a caretaker, a protector, a surrogate parent for so long that the idea of relinquishing that role, of allowing myself to be someone's child again, was both appealing and terrifying. That night, I stood by the window of our bedroom, staring at the stars visible through uncovered glass. The darkness outside no longer represented confinement but possibility, the night sky expanding endlessly above a world we were only beginning to explore. When Eli asked sleepily if we were really going to stay forever, I told him yes. We had found our place in the light. Our bedroom window faced east, offering a view of the neighbor's maple tree, and beyond it, a patch of sky where stars appeared each night like tiny holes punched in black velvet. No curtains covered this window, just simple blinds that we could raise or lower as we pleased, a freedom that still felt miraculous months after our rescue. Eli was already in bed, his stuffed bear clutched to his chest, watching me with heavy-lidded eyes as I stood by the window. The moonlight silvered his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. "Are we really staying?" he asked, his voice thick with approaching sleep. "Forever and ever?" I looked back at the stars, thinking of all we had endured to reach this point. The hunger, the fear, the darkness, the courage it had taken to question, to investigate, to speak up when every instinct had been trained toward silence and compliance. "Yes," I said finally, turning back to him with certainty. "We're staying. This is our home now." He smiled, a pure expression of contentment that I had rarely seen before our rescue. "Good," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "I like it here, in the light." I crossed the room and sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead in a gesture that had comforted him since infancy. "Me too," I whispered, "in the light." Years would pass before the nightmares fully subsided, before I could sleep without checking locks and windows, before Eli stopped hoarding food under his mattress, but gradually the shadows receded. We learned to trust, to play, to live without constant fear. The adoption became official 6 months later, on a bright spring morning when the cherry trees outside the courthouse were in full bloom. We wore new clothes for the occasion, Eli in a button-down shirt and bow tie that made him look older than his years, me in a sweater that Taylor, now Mom, had helped me pick out. The judge who finalized the adoption was different from the one who had sentenced Jenna and our birth mother, a woman with kind eyes who spoke directly to us, rather than over our heads to the adults in the room. She asked if we understood what adoption meant, if we were happy with the Taylors, if we had any questions for her. When she pronounced us legally part of the Taylor family, Eli cheered so loudly that everyone in the courtroom laughed. I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting, a door closing on the past while another opened to the future. The healing wasn't immediate or linear. There were setbacks, difficult days when memories surfaced unexpectedly, or old fears reasserted themselves. Eli continued to struggle with food security, hiding snacks around his room despite the Taylors' assurances that he would never go hungry again. I developed a habit of checking locks multiple times before bed, unable to sleep until I had verified that every door and window was secure. Nightmares plagued us both. Eli would wake screaming from dreams where our birth mother was dragging him back into darkness. My dreams featured Jenna more often, her cold eyes watching as I tried and failed to protect Eli from some nameless threat. School was another challenge. Despite months of intensive tutoring, we both tested well below grade level when it was time to enroll in public school. The Taylors advocated fiercely for appropriate placements and support services, refusing to allow us to be stigmatized for educational gaps that were not our fault. Mr. Taylor, Dad, spent hours each evening helping with homework, breaking down concepts into manageable pieces, celebrating every small victory. Mom created a reward system for reading practice, with trips to the bookstore to select new books when we reached certain milestones. Slowly, painfully, we caught up. By the time I entered high school, I was only 1 grade behind my age group. Eli, whose natural intelligence had been less damaged by our years of isolation, managed to join his age-appropriate class by middle school. The physical scars of malnutrition faded more quickly than the psychological ones. Regular meals, vitamin supplements, and proper medical care corrected most of the deficiencies we had suffered. Eli grew tall and strong, eventually surpassing me in height, a fact he took great delight in teasing me about. I still keep that envelope of documents, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of survival. Evidence that even in the darkest confinement, we found the strength to reach for light. Sometimes justice comes not in perfect measures, but in the freedom to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. And sometimes healing begins with a simple miracle of sunlight on skin that was never allergic to its touch. The envelope now lives in a fireproof box in my closet. I rarely open it, but knowing it's there serves as a reminder, not of the trauma, but of the courage it took to escape it. The documents inside are proof that even a child can recognize truth, can stand against adult authority when that authority is corrupt, can fight for justice and win. Jenna served 10 years of her 12-year sentence before being released on parole. Our birth mother served her full 8 years, then moved to another state. Neither has attempted to contact us, though occasionally I search their names online, needing to reassure myself that they remain far from our lives. The investigation that began with my discovery eventually uncovered a network of corruption extending beyond Jenna to several other social workers and at least 2 supervisors in the department. The scandal led to a complete overhaul of the state's child protective services, with new oversight protocols and accountability measures implemented. J. Emmy's death was eventually ruled a homicide rather than an accident. The marshals were charged but acquitted due to insufficient evidence, a partial justice at best, but at least the truth was officially acknowledged. Eli graduated high school with honors and is now studying psychology at the State University, determined to help other children who have experienced trauma. He still calls me every Sunday night, still looks to me for guidance on important decisions, but has grown into his own person, confident, compassionate, and remarkably well-adjusted despite our early years. As for me, I work as a paralegal in a law firm that specializes in child advocacy cases. The documents I handle daily, court orders, placement reviews, guardian ad litem reports, are similar to those that once controlled our lives, but now I use my knowledge to ensure they protect rather than harm the children they concern. On my desk at work sits a small potted plant that requires direct sunlight to thrive. Each morning, I place it on the windowsill, watching as it turns its leaves toward the light. It serves as a daily reminder of the most important lesson of our journey, that even after years in darkness, we can still grow toward the light when given the chance. The miracle isn't that we survived our captivity, though that itself was against the odds. The true miracle is that we emerged from it capable of trust, of love, of building a life beyond the shadows of our past, that our skin, never truly allergic to sunlight, now thrives in its warmth. That our hearts, once carefully guarded against hope to avoid disappointment, now open freely to the possibilities each new day brings. In the end, that is the justice that matters most. Not the prison sentences or policy changes, important though they are, but the simple, profound freedom to stand in the sunlight without fear, to know that the darkness that once defined us has no power to call us back.